Has anyone known a killer before they killed? What were they like? My family bought a house from a man who flipped houses for a living back when I was growing up. He was a nice man, married with grown kids. He would often come over for dinner and help with minor repairs around the house. We moved away a few years later, and he wanted to buy the house back. Luckily, it was a cash deal because soon after it all went through, he was arrested for child porn. When the cops raided his house, there was no sign of his wife. Upon looking into it, no one had seen or heard from her in months. Turns out, he had murdered her and buried her in their backyard. I sat next to that man at the dinner table as a child. Still haunts me. The younger brother of a girl I was friends with in middle school and high school. They had some struggles growing up, and I know their mother was an abusive relationship because we gave her some help getting away from her husband. And we connected many years later and found out that the younger brother had murdered someone. Initially, it sounded pretty gruesome, but when I actually read court reports, I kind of felt bad for the kid. He had some mental illness issues, but as a teenager apparently, he had been groomed by a much older man into a sexual relationship, where the man provided money, shelter, and of course, drugs. He was extremely controlling and abusive. Eventually, the kid tried to get away and was trying to start a new life with a girl he met, but this guy tracked him down and blackmailed him. Eventually, kid snapped and murdered him. I think I felt worse for the kid because a lot of people can't get away from their abusers. Edit. For those who asked, he was a 16-year-old runaway with a history of drug problems when he started seeing the more than 20 years older guy who used to film him. He struggled with drugs but was doing well, and he met with the man to tell him he loved someone else and he wasn't going to see him again. His story is that the guy attacked him saying he'd rather he die than break up. He had injuries consistent with fending off a knife attack and said he killed the man in self-defense. What probably really screwed him over is that he didn't call the cops, he hid the body instead. Despite all of the evidence pointing to him, Bring preyed on. He got a sentence that is longer than the average human lifespan. He committed the crime in a place where being gay or bisexual isn't really acceptable. A lot of the stories in the news refer to him as a hustler and say that he killed one of his patrons. A few years ago, I hired a father-son handyman team to help me get my house ready to put on the market. Among other things, my outside doorknobs were in bad shape, so they installed new ones. The dad seemed pretty nice, even did a little bit for free. On their third and last day at my house, he was pretty fired up about a big job they were starting the next day. 3 days later, he killed his new clients because they were unhappy with his work. A neighbor saw what happened and ran into her house and hid. He kicked her door in and shot her too. I was terrified until he was caught. I graduated high school with Dr. Death, Chris Dunch. He was an asshole. He was charming with teachers and people who could benefit him. He was awful to everybody else. I didn't see it, but one or more awkward and vulnerable classmates said he bullied him relentlessly, and I believe it. He was easily irritated, and if you got on his nerves, he would really lose his cool. Remarkably mean. And people would just shrug their shoulders and say, "That's just how Chris is." In my first semester of college, I had a computer science professor I really loved. Near the end of the semester, he told us he may be taking time off and finding a replacement for the semester. His severely autistic son had died in a tragic pool accident. He noted that the media was trying to make him look bad. I created a GoFundMe for funeral expenses. He appreciated it and shared photos to use on the page. Fast forward half a year, I get calls from news reporters asking what my thoughts are. He had been arrested on suspected unintentional manslaughter. It turns out he had left his son outside in the cold by the pool, unsupervised, when he left for work. His son was never supposed to be unattended. His son was outside for who knows how long, before the professor's daughter found the boy face down in the pool. Further research into the case revealed the boy was living in an unfurnished basement, feces all over the walls, often left alone. The police were at the home frequently. CPS had made various safety requirements for them that they never followed. He's being charged with unintentional manslaughter and various forms of child abuse. Him and his wife are being charged for filling the boy's Ritalin prescription for many months after the death. I still believe it was intentional. Texts revealed the daughter discovered the boy when the professor texted her, asking her to check if Freak was okay. Edit. Some people here did their research. I learned a lot more about the case. Any doubts I had have been dissolved. I'm confident this was not just some big sad accident. When it first happened, he told his classes that one particular media outlet was trying to portray it as more than an accident. He told us directly how upset he was about that, and really emphasized how important it was that it was nothing more than an accident. I didn't think much of it. Of course, you wouldn't want people blaming you for your son's death. Looking back, it should have raised more red flags. It's crazy because he was so nice. He motivated me to stick to computer science. He seemed so appreciative of the GoFundMe. He was very highly rated. It's crazy. My little sister dated a guy when she was in high school who ended up murdering a couple he owed money to for heroin. This dude beat them with a fucking baseball bat and hammer. He almost got the death sentence, but ended up with life in prison with no possibility of parole. He was a seemingly nice, polite teenager. I used to drive him and my sister around for various dates and things. He was quiet, but not oddly so. He just seemed like a normal teenage boy. Edit. Sorry, I just got some clarification on some details. The murder weapons were actually a microphone stand and a hammer. He is eligible for parole after 51 years. This happened in 2015. My best friend's older brother killed her stepmom, strangled her, and burned the house down. He was just like any other teenage older brother. A bit rebellious, but nothing out of the ordinary. He was kinda goth and liked heavy metal and had dark humor. He played GoldenEye with us and always let me use the see-through purple controller. He teased his little sister just like any brother would. One time, he took us for a car ride and did donuts in a church parking lot while blasting a Big Shiny Tunes album, and it was really fun. Nothing ever indicated what he would do later in life. I knew this guy. Before, literally the night before the crime, he was at my house talking about a new job he thought he'd gotten, how he was going to be able to take better care of his daughter, a new tattoo he was going to get, just random stuff. Some backstory, he had a brain tumor when he was, I think, 9 or 10. Not sure what kind or where, but he was a Make-A-Wish kid. I think he went to Disney or something. But they did manage to get it out with surgery. So he was a little, well, he wasn't stupid or disabled, but I'd say slow, basically. He was a little shit through his teen years. Big pants, loud music, fast car. Yo, I'm gangsta, kind of thing. But when he met his girlfriend and then, especially when his daughter was born, he seemed to change a lot for the better. He was the younger brother of a friend of mine. I went from, you cannot bring Eddie to my house and I don't even want him to know where we live, to, sure, Eddie and you can come for dinner. So, yeah, lots of change. The night it happened, we played D&D that evening, and he was as boringly normal as he ever was. Actually, he'd never expressed any anger or anything toward the girlfriend's mother at all. He'd said how happy he was that she was letting them live there and helping with the baby. After, we only saw him once more, in court, when he was sentenced. We went with his mom, who we knew, and at the end, he turned his face and wouldn't even nod to us. I just don't get it. I don't think I ever will. I went to high school with a girl who poisoned her father. No one knew until she confessed a year later, watching a Shakespeare play in college. She was a little weird in school, but I didn't think she was capable of that. She confessed to my cousin, by the way. Sheesh. He was really nice, and I had gone to K to 12 with him. Never knew him to be the kind of person that would even get upset. Then I get a text a couple years ago asking, "Do you know about X? Him and his brother killed their parents. I'm out of the loop on this one. Younger brother was cleared." My sister was killed by her fiancé. He was, well, normal. Took good care of her during recovery from surgery. A bit weird, but nothing stands out. Weird as in opposite interests and shy, where my sister was outgoing. Never would have expected it from him until I had to clean out their place and found a bunch of guns and crap load of knives and shit. I spent 3 months on a study abroad with a Special Forces ex-FBI guy named Joe. We were a small group of mostly students, whereas Joe was older and there as part of foreign immersion training for the military. He was a little odd, awkward at times, and didn't share too much about himself, which we mostly attributed to the age difference. I'd describe Joe as very intense but kind-hearted. The military was very important to him, and he always seemed very focused on that. But occasionally he'd make a dry joke or let his guard down for a moment with the group. He was very into photography and shared lots of great photos from the trip. He was also somewhat the protector of the group, and we always felt completely safe with him. One story I'll share was when he was walking over a bridge and spied some guys in the trees waiting to jump down and rob him. He pulled out a large knife he carried on him and casually brandished it as he walked by. The guys smartly decided not to mess with Joe, but after he crossed, he saw them sprint across the bridge and hide behind a building. 2 policemen showed up shortly after, and Joe showed them where the guys were hiding so the police could arrest them. Anyways, a few years after we got back, I heard the news that he had killed someone and took his own life. He had been training for a new position, and his commander deemed that he wasn't physically fit enough for the job. The judgment effectively ended his career, and he felt he had been unfairly judged. He brought a gun into the base and shot his commander dead, then killed himself. I played basketball with a guy a few years ago in high school. Tried to find him on Facebook, and turns out he was being tried for murder. Apparently, he and some of his friends were looking for pot money, so they broke into this guy's house, and somehow the guy ended up dead. Everyone in his group said he pulled the trigger, but he denied it. Maybe he did it, maybe he didn't. But I can say that he was a genuinely nice person when I knew him. Never would have expected him to kill someone, but I guess my mom was right about hanging out with the wrong crowd. Yes, was hired at the same time as him. Worked right next to him for several years. He was one of those stoner guys always bragging about the parties he went to. He was a little obnoxious in a bro sort of way, so I always skipped hanging out with him after work. After I left that job a little while later, he killed his ex-girlfriend. While her 5-year-old was in the apartment watching TV, took the kid on a road trip to Texas, and smothered her on Christmas morning and left her in a suitcase on the side of the road. I was friends with a guy who was accused of physical abusing his son. He went through the courts to fight it. The ex-girlfriend finally admitted she made it up because he cheated on her. He ended up killing her then himself. Boy, a couple years my minor in high school. He was always the outcast in his classes. He dressed funny, talked funny, and said disturbing things that some recall as threats, mostly to the girls of the school. After graduation, he ended up butchering a homeless woman. He was, I can't say living together or in a relationship with. I'm not sure what their status was. Either way, kitchen knife drained her into the tub. In court, he showed no remorse and was proud to have finally ended someone's life. His father was my professor in university. He took it very hard. Yeah, a kid who was in my friend group back in the 80s. He was the weird one. A GF of mine dated him and said he was the weirdest kisser ever, like a tiny little weasel tongue darting around in her mouth. Anyway, when we were all about 19 and out of high school, my boyfriend and I are watching the news, and there's Frank. He'd grown his hair out and dyed it blonde, all Vince Neil-like, and, apparently, slit his girlfriend's throat from ear to ear, and was now on the run and using another friend's name as an alias. He got caught and sentenced to a whole bunch of years in prison. There's more. I ran into him after he got out. I didn't recognize him. It was maybe 2006, and a massive buff dude in a convenience store called my name. He had to tell me who he was. I talked with him for a while. One of the first things he did was rattle off the childhood phone numbers of myself and about a half dozen of our friends in our friends group. He'd remembered all those numbers for like 20 plus years, and that was the first thing he thought to tell me about. He was driving a red Corvette. He proudly revved it up, told me how he made the money pimpin', and told me that if I was a good girl, maybe I'd get to ride in it someday. I kept running into him, coincidentally. A car would pull up next to me, and it would be him. He showed up at my house driving one of those meat trucks with the coolers like Omaha Steaks or something, trying to sell me steaks. He asked if I needed a roommate. He assured me his killin' days were over. He was very scarily intelligent and quite funny. He told me about getting into an altercation with his vegan neighbors, going back into his house, returning with a head of cabbage and chucking at the dude LOL. I really don't think the constantly running into him was coincidental, and I was kinda disturbed by it. Oddly, I just received a random FB message from him asking if I knew anyone who wanted to buy a new fan. We aren't FB friends or anything. Anyway, yeah, odd dude.